That night, Sophie slipped into the studio again. The air still smelled of rain, the windows fogged at the corners, the wooden floor cool beneath her socks. She didn't turn on the overheads, just the row of bulbs above the mirror, casting soft amber light. It was late enough that the neighborhood had gone quiet, and the only sound was the muted echo of her steps. She wasn't dancing for technique or muscle memory, just movement, expression. She turned, arms floating, leg extending, modified from the routines she used to perfect. Her knee didn't like it, but it didn't stop her either. Pain now was a known companion, one she worked around. When the door opened behind her, she didn't startle. She just turned her head. Daniel stood in the threshold, uncertain. "You couldn't sleep either," she said. He shook his head. "I saw the lights." She moved toward him, heart thudding in her chest. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like she was something fragile, precious, not broken. "I've been thinking," she said, "about how long it's been since I shared the floor with anyone." He hesitated. "I don't dance." Sophie stepped closer, barefoot on the boards. "I'm not asking you to perform. I'm asking you to move. With me." His voice was quiet. "I haven't danced since before." "I know. You know I'm not graceful. I'll step on your foot." She smiled. "I'll live." She offered her hand, and he took it. Their fingers touched, and it was like breath catching on a frosty morning, unexpected and soft. He let her guide him at first. A step forward, a turn, her hand on his shoulder, his hand tentative at her waist. They didn't speak. They barely looked at each other. But something moved in the quiet, blossoming like a lily opening to the gentle caress of the sun's warmth. Daniel was solid, not just in his build, but in the way he moved when he committed. When she leaned back, he steadied her. When she turned under his arm, he caught her with just the right amount of pressure to say, "I've got you." She was aware of everything, the warmth of his hand, the way his breath changed as they moved, the way his eyes flicked down to her mouth and then away again. This wasn't just a dance. It was her asking, "Can you be here with me?" And he answered, "Yes, I want to be." When the music in her mind faded and the motion stilled, she stayed close, breathless, her forehead nearly brushing his. "Daniel," she whispered, unsure of what came next. But then he looked at her. He hadn't meant to come to the studio. He'd seen the lights, yes, but he told himself he was checking for safety, nothing more. But then he saw her, moving like shadow and flame, graceful, restrained, aching, and he couldn't walk away. He didn't expect the touch of her hand to undo him. At first, he was hesitant, counting steps in his head, trying not to think about Melissa, about old memories he didn't want. But Sophie didn't make him feel old. She made him feel present. Her eyes never left his face. Her movements adjusted to his. And suddenly, it wasn't a performance, or even a rehearsal. It was something truer. When she turned and came back into his arms, he caught her by instinct. No calculation, no defense, just need. His throat tightened. Sophie wasn't like anyone he'd ever known. She wasn't asking him to fix her or protect her or stay away. She was just asking him to see her. And somewhere in the middle of that turning, he realized he did. When they stopped, he didn't let go right away. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to. The next morning brought sunlight and chaos. The kids were awake before 7, making pancake demands and blanket forts out of kitchen chairs. Claire looked half exasperated, half triumphant. Daniel found Sophie on the porch with a coffee, hair damp from her shower, eyes still lit from the night before. They didn't speak of the dance, not yet. Instead, they took the kids to the beach, helped them dig a sandcastle big enough to sit in, and laughed when one of the twins tried to put seaweed in Sophie's bag. Claire watched it all with an amused smile and that too knowing gaze of hers. Later, when they packed the car and buckled the kids in, Claire lingered by Daniel's side. "She's different," she murmured. Daniel didn't respond. Claire nudged his arm. "And so are you." He looked down at her. "Is that good or bad?" "It's real," she said. "I think she's the real deal, Daniel. Don't screw it up." He smiled, not his polite smile, but something warmer. "I don't plan to." Claire leaned in and kissed his cheek. "That's all I needed to hear." She got into the car, waved, and pulled away. Daniel stood on the porch, watching the taillights vanish down the tree-lined street. Behind him, he felt Sophie's presence before she spoke. "Your sister is scary," she said lightly. "She's not so bad once she likes you." "And now?" He turned. "She thinks you're the real deal." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" He didn't look away. "Yeah, I do." Sophie wasn't sure what had changed, just that something had. It was in the way Daniel lingered by the studio the next day under the pretense of checking the gutters, or how he stood beside her a little longer than necessary when they passed each other in the garden. Their conversations weren't any more frequent, and yet everything felt more open, like the hush between them had warmed. He brought over a basket of lemons from a client's tree and said, "You bake, I draw. It's only fair you keep me in pastry." She smiled. Challenge accepted. They didn't speak of the dance, but the memory lived in her shoulders, her breath, the softness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. She worked late that afternoon, a brochure design for a boutique inn on the edge of town, and when she emailed the draft, she wandered outside to clear her head. The air was cool but sweet, a breeze that hinted spring was near. She found Daniel in the garage with the door open, sorting planks of reclaimed wood. He glanced up. "Don't suppose you're looking for a lesson in dovetail joints?" "Not today." She paused, then added, "I just wanted to say thanks." "For?" She hesitated. "For last night." He straightened, dusting off his hands. "I should thank you." She tilted her head. "Why?" He considered that. "Because you reminded me that movement doesn't always mean escape. Sometimes it means turning towards something." She didn't respond, but something fluttered in her chest. The next few days passed in quiet harmony. Sophie taught in the evenings, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and on the other nights, she'd find Daniel in the yard or the garage, sanding old furniture or sketching a new build. Sometimes she sat nearby with her laptop. Sometimes he offered her tea. One evening, she found a sketch resting on her porch chair with her name scrawled on the corner. A girl mid-twirl, her arms fluid, her face serene. Her. Sophie didn't say anything, but she pressed the sketch into her journal and ran her fingers over it for longer than she meant to. That weekend, they took a drive up the coast to visit a salvage yard Daniel liked for old architectural details. She tagged along, half for the company, half for curiosity. He didn't talk much on the way there, but when he showed her how to spot a real Tiffany window from a knockoff, his entire posture changed. Focused, intent. She loved seeing him like that. As they walked through aisles of antique doors and tile work, she pointed to a weathered porch post. "That looks like it has stories." He nodded. "I like the ones that look a little broken." Sophie turned to him. "Why?" Because they were still standing. On the drive home, the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in amber and violet. Sophie leaned her head against the window. "I think I'm happier now than I was before the injury," she whispered. "Is that strange?" Daniel glanced over. "Not at all. Everything I thought I wanted, it wasn't real. Or maybe it wasn't mine. It belonged to someone else's idea of who I should be. And now? Now I'm becoming someone I actually like." Daniel didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "You're not the only one." She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road, but his hand reached over, and gently, he took hers. The days folded into each other like well-worn pages. Sophie found herself watching for Daniel before she realized she was doing it, listening for the crunch of gravel under his boots, the creak of the porch boards when he passed. He didn't hover, but he was there, fixing a studio window that had stuck, adding a second light above her guest house entryway, leaving her favorite tea blend on the kitchen shelf with a note that read, "Thought you might be out." They still hadn't spoken about the dance, but it had shaped everything since. One night after class, she lingered alone at the studio, massaging her knee with practiced hands. She hadn't pushed too hard. She knew her limits by now, but even careful movement could leave echoes. Daniel showed up at the door holding a toolkit and a flashlight. "I saw your porch light flickering." Sophie smiled tiredly. "You have impeccable timing." He stepped in and set the light on the floor, hands moving automatically to test the bulb. She sat on the bench near the mirrored wall, rubbing her knee with an absence of mind. "Bad night?" he asked, not prying, just present. She nodded. "It's manageable. It's always manageable." He paused. That's your word for pain? She hesitated. It's my word for life after ballet. Daniel crossed the room and sat beside her. Not too close, not too far. Then, without asking, he moved closer and gently lifted her leg to his lap, massaging her knee with gentle fingers. Sophie could not understand how he knew, but somehow he found the points where she experienced the most pain, his fingers teasing the soreness from the wounded limb, warmth radiating from his fingers. Do you miss it? He asked. She looked down at her leg, noted the continued movements of his hands. Some days, she said, but mostly I miss what it meant, who I was. He turned toward her. You're still her. I don't know. Her voice dropped. That version of me would have danced through fire for approval. That approval from my mentor, from critics, from everyone meant everything. That Sophie didn't know who she was without someone else's applause. Daniel was quiet for a moment, though his fingers kept their slow dance. There was nothing sensual about the action, yet somehow Sophie's breath caught in her throat from the sheer intimacy. Then Daniel looked at her. What happened? Sophie didn't speak at first. Then she said, the injury wasn't just an accident. Daniel's gaze remained steady on her. She met his eyes. I don't think I knew it then. But now, looking back, she ignored every warning sign. Every time I winced, she told me to push through. Every doctor's note, every twinge. She made me believe I was being dramatic. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not dramatic. That's abuse. Sophie exhaled. I'm starting to understand that. She didn't tell him everything. Not yet. Not how the mentor had deliberately cast another dancer in her place the moment she was injured, claiming it was time to cut the weak links. Or how the silence afterward had hurt worse than the tear in her tendon. But she didn't need to. Daniel didn't interrupt, didn't offer hollow comfort. He just reached out and wrapped his hand around hers, anchoring her. They sat there for some time like that, her hand in his, her knee in his lap, his free hand continuing its miracle work over her knee. Later that week, the morning arrived with wind and scattered clouds. Sophie was preparing for her afternoon class when she saw a familiar name pop up on her phone. Vivian Ames, her former coach. Sophie stared at the screen, wondering if she was dreaming at all. It was a brief message. In town for a few days, saw your studio online, would love to stop by. There was no apology, no warmth, just the kind of calculated reach someone made when they wanted to feel powerful again. It was so very like Vivian that all the old pain associated with her former coach settled in Sophie's knotted stomach. That night she worked late again, but memories fractured her focus. She didn't tell Daniel about the message. Not yet. She needed to decide what it meant to her first. But the next morning, when she walked to the main house to return a borrowed drill, she found Daniel sketching at the kitchen table, the morning light catching silver in his hair. He looked up, and something in his gaze, the steadiness, the quiet understanding, made her heart turn over. Do you ever feel like the past shows up just to test if you've moved on? She asked without preamble. He paused. All the time. Sophie leaned against the doorframe. What did it take for you to stop running from it? Daniel's fingers curled around his pencil. I didn't. Sophie waited, knowing he would explain. He met her eyes. I left the city, quit projects I loved, cut ties with people who mattered, and I told myself it was peace, but it was avoidance. A pang for this quiet, gentle man filled her heart. Sophie reached out and grasped his hand. Daniel continued, softer now. There was someone, years ago. We were serious. I thought she knew me better than anyone. Then one day she accused me of something I didn't do, said I'd been inappropriate with a coworker. I hadn't, and everyone who mattered knew it, but she left anyway. Sophie's breath caught. Daniel looked away. I stopped trusting myself after that. Stopped believing others could see me for who I really was. A long silence stretched between them. Daniel, she didn't value you, or she was a control freak who didn't like it when you talked to another woman. Maybe she was. Daniel sighed and put his pencil down. I've thought about it since then, and I can't think of any instances where trust was damaged between us. One day we were fine, then we weren't. I wondered if she ever truly saw me. I see you, Sophie said. Daniel didn't pull away. This time he closed his hand around hers. Vivian Ames arrived exactly on time, her knock as sharp and precise as her reputation. Sophie stood frozen in the studio's doorway until she felt Daniel's presence at her side. He wasn't touching her, just standing there, calm, grounded, steady, her guardian angel and moral support all rolled into one. "You sure you want me here?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said. "I think I do." She opened the door. Vivian stood on the porch in a tailored coat and impossibly polished shoes, holding a small gift bag that didn't match her expression. "Sophie," she said with a tight smile, eyes flicking past her to Daniel, "I didn't realize you'd have company." Sophie stepped aside. "Vivian, this is Daniel. He owns the property, and he's a friend." Daniel nodded, polite but unreadable. "Welcome." Vivian's smile flickered. Charmed. They walked into the studio. Vivian looked around with a faint air of condescension, the kind that could pass as polite interest if you didn't know her. "It's quaint," she said. "I imagine you don't get much serious talent in a town this size." Sophie folded her arms. "We get heart. That's enough." Vivian's gaze cooled. "Still idealistic, I see." Daniel moved to stand near Sophie, just off to the side, but clearly there. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Vivian set the gift bag on a bench. "I wanted to see for myself how you are, what you were doing with all this." Sophie's fingers curled. "Why now?" Vivian blinked. "Pardon?" "You haven't contacted me once since the injury. Not when I left, though your support would have meant the world to me. Not when I started walking again. You didn't even contact me when the press released that I'd opened a studio. So again, why now?" Vivian smoothed her scarf. "You were always sensitive. I assumed you needed space." Daniel, still quiet, finally said, "Funny how space is what people give when they can't offer honesty." Vivian stiffened, but Sophie stepped forward before she could respond. "I was injured, Vivian. You knew it. You pushed me anyway." "I pushed you to your potential," Vivian snapped. "You pushed me past safety." Sophie's voice rose. "And when I tore my knee, you acted like I'd failed you." Vivian's mouth flattened. "I begged you to let me rest. You told me dancers don't get that luxury. You made me believe I was weak." Vivian's eyes darted toward Daniel, uncomfortable with an audience. "Sophie, you're exaggerating. You always took things personally." "She trusted you," Daniel said, "and you broke that." Vivian turned sharply. "I don't know what you think this is." "I think," Sophie interrupted, "this is closure. Not for you, for me." Vivian opened her mouth, then closed it. There was a moment of pure silence. Then Sophie walked to the door and opened it. Vivian hesitated, pride and something close to regret warring behind her expression. But in the end, she walked out without another word. Sophie closed the door. They stood in the studio's stillness. Light filtered in from the tall windows, golden and gentle. Daniel reached for her hand. "Are you okay?" She nodded, then shook her head. "I don't know, but I think so. I didn't expect to feel empty." "No," she said quietly. "Free." They sat on the bench near the mirrored wall. Sophie leaned into him without thinking, and he pulled her closer. "I thought I needed her apology," she said, "but all I needed was to not need it anymore." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "She doesn't define you, not now, maybe never." Sophie looked up at him. "You were good in there." "I was just backup." "No, you were home base." The phrase settled between them, warm, unspoken, tender. And for the first time, Sophie didn't feel like the broken product of someone else's ambition. She felt like someone building something new, side by side with the man who saw her for who she was, not because he had to, but because he chose to. It had been a week since Vivian's visit, and the studio felt different now. Not physically, nothing had changed, but the air had loosened, like someone had opened a window and let the past drift out. Sophie moved through her days with a new quiet, not the stillness of hiding, the stillness of strength. Daniel noticed it in her teaching, more relaxed, more confident. He saw it in how she spoke, even laughed, as if the part of her always watching for ghosts had gone still. Daniel didn't ask questions. He just stayed, showed her he cared without words or gestures. Sometimes that meant replacing the weather stripping on the back door, or adjusting the studio's track lighting so the girls wouldn't squint into mirrors. Other times it meant sitting in the back with a sketch pad while she ran warm-ups, unnoticed by anyone but Sophie. She'd glance at him sometimes, just for a second, and he'd smile, eyes soft, hands busy with pencil and paper. One evening, as class ended and the last students trickled out, Sophie walked over and held out her hand. He gave her the sketch without a word. It was of her, not dancing, not posed, just standing at the bar, head tilted, correcting a student's form. He had captured the curve of her shoulder, the focus in her brow, in the way she held herself, not like someone broken, but someone lit from within. Sophie's throat tightened. You always see what I'm not trying to show. Daniel looked at her, and there was something different in his gaze now. Not cautious, not tentative. Something warmer, braver. You make it easy, he said. That weekend they went to the market together. It wasn't planned. Sophie mentioned she needed apples for a new scone recipe, and Daniel offered to drive since he needed cedar shims anyway. They walked between stalls like they'd always done this, Sophie commenting on flower arrangements, Daniel noting roof lines of old buildings as if they were sketches in motion. At the end of the row, an elderly woman selling herbs smiled at them. You two make a lovely couple, she said, handing over a bunch of lavender. Sophie blushed. Daniel just nodded, almost amused. Thank you, he said, and it wasn't a denial. That night, Daniel cooked. Sophie sat on the porch steps, a cat curled up beside her, listening to music through one earbud while he worked in the kitchen. When he brought out plates, she was smiling. What? She pulled out the earbud and grinned, just realizing something. He raised a brow. I used to think love was all adrenaline, fireworks and pirouettes and stolen hours. But maybe it's this. He sat beside her. This? Quiet, she said. Trust. Someone making grilled cheese with caramelized onions because he knows that's my favorite. Daniel smiled faintly. You changed your stage. She leaned into him. You gave me a new one. They didn't talk about labels or timelines or what tomorrow would bring. They didn't need to. Somehow the silence between them had become something sacred. Not a void, but a shared space. And in that space, something beautiful was unfolding. Something real. Something theirs. It was late, and the wind had shifted. Not harsh, just restless, like the seasons were changing their minds again. Sophie stood by the sink, rinsing mugs from the tea they'd shared. Daniel was still on the porch, leaning against the railing, eyes on the dark horizon. She didn't want to intrude, but she sensed something. A pause before something is said. When she stepped outside, he didn't turn, just spoke softly. I thought I was going to marry her. Sophie stopped. She loved music. Always had something playing, jazz mostly. She'd dance in the kitchen barefoot, even on concrete. Said it made her feel grounded. He smiled, just a little, but it was the kind of smile that only lived beside old hurt. She was gone before I could finish the house. Sophie said nothing. She just moved closer. She accused me of something I didn't do. Not cheating, not exactly. More like betrayal of ambition. He exhaled. I'd taken a commission she didn't want me to take. Said I'd sold out, that I wasn't who she thought I was. Then came the accusations about the coworker. Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. Were you? I don't know, he said. Maybe I just wasn't who she needed me to be. The porch light buzzed above them, casting soft halos over the wood grain. She left a week later, didn't return my calls, moved cities. I never saw her again. Sophie reached for his hand. She was the reason I started sketching strangers, he said. I was trying to remember how to see people without assuming they'd leave. He looked at her then, really looked. But you make it hard to stay guarded. Sophie stepped in close enough that her forehead brushed his shoulder. I'm not going anywhere. The breeze caught her hair, and his hand moved to tuck it behind her ear. I know, he said. Not a promise, a belief. The next morning she found another sketch tucked under her front door. It wasn't a drawing of her, not this time. It was a small cottage, warm light in the windows, a garden half wild, a little girl's bicycle on the lawn. On the back, in Daniel's hand, were 5 words. Just something I'm thinking about. The studio was quiet that Monday, save for the soft squeak of slippers on wood and the murmur of piano music playing through the Bluetooth speaker. Sophie watched her students warm up, correcting posture with a gentle tap or a wordless nod. The fresh energy in her was noticeable. Calm, but radiant, like someone who had stopped running from silence. Daniel had stopped by earlier with a bag of lemon muffins. For the dancers, he said with a slight smile, though he'd left one unwrapped on top. And for the teacher. When the last student had gone home, Sophie stepped out back, where Daniel was finishing a small repair on the exterior light. He looked up, saw her watching him, and smiled. "What's next?" she asked. He glanced at the wiring in his hands. "For this? Just tightening the bracket." "No," she said, brushing sawdust from his sleeve. "For us?" Daniel looked at her, not with surprise, but with the quiet clarity of someone who had already made up his mind. "I've been thinking," he said. "The house next to mine, the one with the wild roses growing through the fence, it's for sale." Sophie blinked. "You want me to move again?" "No," he said with a faint grin. "I want us to dream a little. Together. Whether it's that house or another, or you in my house, in my life, in my heart. I'm not rushing anything. I just want you to know I see a future here. With you." She stepped into his arms. "I already live next door, Daniel." "I know, but I think maybe one day you won't." That night, Sophie sat on the porch of the main house, sketchpad in hand, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Daniel was inside, making dinner. Pasta, with far too much garlic if the smell was any indication. She flipped to a new page. It wasn't a house or a flower or even a dancer. It was a storybook cover, something soft and illustrated, with a cottage on a cliff, a woman with wild hair laughing, and a man in a button-down shirt holding a toolbox and a cat. "Stillness and Grace," she wrote across the top, and in the bottom corner, "For the one who saw me before I ever saw myself." She smiled, tucked the sketchpad under her arm, and went inside. Home. It arrived in a simple brown envelope. No return address, just Sophie's looping handwriting on the front. For Daniel. He found it on his desk after coming in from the yard, hands still dusty from planting lavender by the fence. Inside was a slim, hardcover book. Illustrated. The kind you'd expect to find on a child's bookshelf. Gentle watercolors, soft lines, the faint scent of ink still fresh. It was titled Stillness and Grace. The cover showed a cottage tucked between trees, a wild garden full of cats and daisies, and a man and woman walking hand in hand down a weathered path. He wore a button-down shirt and carried a sketchpad. She held ballet slippers and wore a sundress. He flipped it open. Each page told their story, not literally but through metaphor. A quiet architect who forgot how to speak without blueprints, and a dancer who lost her stage but found music in the quiet. A garden growing between them, wild and beautiful. On the dedication page, she had written, "For the man who saw me when I didn't know how to see myself, Sophie." Daniel stared at the words for a long time, then closed the book and placed it on the shelf beside his old sketchbooks. That evening, they drove to the coast, just for a walk. Sophie said the baby liked the sound of waves. They spoke of wedding plans, Claire taking over everything, claiming it would be a celebration, the likes of which the town had never seen, and where they wanted to travel. They spoke of life together. Somehow their lives together felt more real than they ever had apart. Weeks later, they visited the small clinic on the edge of town. Sophie lay on the exam table, her hand tucked into his. The screen flickered. A heartbeat pulsed, a curve of the spine, a flutter of movement. Their child, barely bigger than a pear, but already the center of their world. Daniel's fingers wrapped around hers. She looked over at him. "Are you okay?" He nodded, voice quiet. "Yeah, just didn't know life could get this full." She smiled. "Neither did I." As they stepped outside into the early evening, the sky was dipped in gold. The scent of the sea was in the air. They walked slowly, side by side, hand in hand. No rush, no fear, just stillness and grace and love. Real, quiet, enduring. Original, heartwarming fiction every week. Subscribe for your next great story.